Plans were announced last month, which could lead to a form of steel returning to Teesside. British Steel is looking at building an electric arc furnace at its site in Lackenby. But how does it work and what does it mean for the region? Well, our political reporter is David McMillan. He's been looking into this. He joins me now. David, this proposal's being billed as a return of steelmaking to Teesside. That would be a big moment for the area, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, Tom. There's a huge emotional connection to steelmaking on Teesside. We know how proud the region is of the steel it produced, which can still be seen all over the world, most notably in the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Employment is always very much at the forefront of people's minds when you talk about steel. Ask people in Eston what they thought of the prospect of a new form of steelmaking being brought to the region would be. Everyone talked about jobs, getting new jobs for the many people who are out of work, getting new jobs for future generations. Now, this proposed electric arc furnace would create around 250 direct jobs, so it doesn't come close to replicating what was lost when the steelworks closed back in 2015. But there would be more jobs in the supply line, and it would also secure jobs at the British Steel plants at Lackenby and Skinning Grove, which were the steel that is made at the electric arc furnace would supply those plants. But with this form of steelmaking as well, Tom, there's also a potential benefit to the environment because traditional steelmaking uses enormous amounts of fossil fuels. This method, using the electric arc furnace, uses electricity, of course. So if you can produce that electricity from renewable sources like solar or wind farms, it should provide a sustainable method of making steel.
So how does this proposed new furnace work?
Well, it uses a process of electrolysis. So in my usual unscientific way of trying to explain these things, you take a whole load of scrap metal, you put it through the furnace, it gets zapped by the electrolysis. That creates a huge amount of heat. It melts all the steel. You can then use very clever techniques to treat that melted, molten metal and turn it into new steel. Now, few people know more about steelmaking on Teesside than Jon Bolton. He's been in the industry since the 80s. He was a key figure when the Redcar blast furnace was mothballed back in 2009. He's now executive chairman at the Materials Processing Institute in Southbank, and they just so happen to have a working electric arc furnace at their research centre. And Mr Bolton says British Steel's plans are a positive start, but more would need to be done to make it a transformative moment in Teesside's industrial history.
They're essentially a method of making electric or recycling scrap metal into new steel. It is quite a simple process and it's a proven process. So moving from blast furnace technology to electric arc furnace technology is a very positive and important step, both to decarbonise, importantly, but actually gives us the opportunity of being more competitive.
It's Jon Bolton there, a key figure in the industry since the 80s, back when, as David said, when the Redcar blast furnace was mothballed in 2009. That extra investment, David, is something that local groups have been calling for as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. So there was an event in Grangetown last week where union leaders, business leaders and community groups came together and signed an open letter. Now that called for a number of things. One of them was more investment in the UK steel industry, particularly on Teesside from our politicians. Another thing that they want is to see greater use of British-made steel in public buildings that are being constructed. Now there are examples of that happening around the Tees Valley. There's British-made steel being used in the big Sia wind farm plant at Tees Works and also in the rebuild of Darlington Railway Station. And the Conservative MP for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, Sir Simon Clarke, says that proves they are delivering on their promises.
We are leading by example on this. The new Sia offshore wind turbine factory, which is currently going up at Tees Works, that is being built using British steel, and that is a really good example of us practising what we preach.
Middlesbrough MP for South and East Cleveland, Sir Simon Clarke there. Labour also say steel is part of their plans for the region as well, don't they?
Absolutely. So Darlington councillor Chris McEwen is going to be the party's candidate for the Tees Valley mayoral election next year. He says he'll lobby for money to try and bring traditional steelmaking back to Teesside, but using more environmentally sustainable methods. That would mean swapping the fossil fuels which it traditionally uses for green hydrogen.
Labour's got a commitment to invest up to £3 billion into green steel. So electric arc furnace will give us one element of the jigsaw, but the other element of the jigsaw is to get primary steel making back. And I think that's really, really important from a strategic perspective, both for the Tees Valley, but also nationally.
That's Chris McEwen there.